It was 4 years ago in July. Sam, my son, was 4 years old at the time, and his sister Amelia was 5. And Sam became unwell, had a sore throat. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, he was quite unwell, typical sore throat fever, not eating, not really drinking, just laying on the sofa. I decide then on the Monday he needs to go to the doctor's, so I get an emergency doctor's appointment. And while we were there, he cried the whole time. And I remember people looking at me in the doctor's surgery, sort of, like, what's the matter with your child? Because he just cried and didn't stop crying. So we went in to see the nurse, because that's all that was there. So we went in to see her, and at this point Sam was quite lifeless. He was covered in a rash from head to toe. It was almost like a heat rash. I did the glass test, straight away as a parent, you're thinking meningitis. We went into the room, we just laid him down on their bed, and I spoke to the nurse. She checked his throat, but that was it. She went and got a doctor, and he came in, and he just stood by the door, and he asked her if she had done what she'd done. She said, I checked his throat, it's a bit red, and that's it. And that was it. He said, okay, you're doing the right things, keep an eye on it, come back to us if anything else happens. So he's laying in his bed, he's lying there, his breathing is very rapid, covered in a rash. He kept asking for a drink over and over. I want a drink, I want a drink. His skin was all mottly, he had a fever. He was just pretty lifeless, really. And it was early hours of the morning then. I went up, it was around 5, 6. I went upstairs to see my husband and said, I think he's taken a turn for the worse. I really think he needs to go to hospital. He came downstairs, took a look at Sam and said, oh, I think you're right, I'll take him. I don't know, maybe half an hour had passed. And it was around 7 o'clock-ish, I think, maybe between 7 and 8. And my phone rings, and it was my husband. And Matt said to me on the phone, you need to get here straight away. They don't think he's going to make it. I ran into A&E, and I knew where the children's section was. So as I was running down the corridor, I could hear a baby crying. It sounded like a newborn baby crying. There were screams and screeches, and I followed that sound. I didn't recognise the sound, but as I got into the bay in a children's A&E, I realised that it was my son. When I walked into that bay, there was just chaos in front of me. There was someone trying to bag him with oxygen. There were just nurses and doctors everywhere, frantically rushing around, drilling a hole through his bone of his leg. And that's what the crying was, that's what the screaming was. I'm not sure what happened, because I was in the little cubicle next door, because I couldn't bear what I was watching. It was my son, my baby boy, and he was dying in front of me. After that happened, we were taken up to we went in the lift and through the hospital, and we went up to intensive care. And it was, we were told to wait in the little visitors room, which was just outside. And they ran through the doors, and that was the last we seen of them. And we remained in this little visitors room for maybe over an hour. And it was the worst hour of my life. After around an hour or so, the consultant came out, and I remember just frantically trying to read his face. And he sat us down and he said, he's still alive, but he's so poorly. I need to explain to you how poorly he is. There's a very, very high chance that he's not actually going to make it. He said, I think he told us then, they thought he had pneumonia and septicemia. Obviously his body, what they explained was his body had gone into septic shock, and it all started shutting down. I stayed in intensive care. I wanted to run, but he was my child, so I didn't like what I was seeing. I found it very hard to watch somebody. I felt so helpless, really, because I couldn't help my son fight it. The doctors were helping, but I couldn't. So I took myself away into intensive care, and I just rocked in the corner. Over the next couple of days, what happened was there were a number of things. So the renal team spoke to us about kidney failure, possible dialysis, possible kidney transplants in the future. But you know what? I was like, that's fine. As long as he survives, I'm okay with that. We can deal with that. So that was one sort of little roller coaster ride we had to get over. Then the heart specialist come and see us because his heart rate was so high for so long and his blood pressure was so low. Then his legs and arms had gone black. I think it's something to do with the septicemia and the fact that the oxygen, obviously, because he'd gone into septic shock and his heart rate was 210 for so long, it was obviously taking care of all the major organs. This, it's all dying, and if it carries on, there's a possibility of amputation. So yeah, we dealt with it. We were like, yes, we're going to do this. Or so I thought we had, because what happened then was the consultant came in and spoke to us, and there was sort of white matter on the CT scan or MRI. And basically what she said was that it was the part which affects motor and speech. So we had to go into a consultation room and with all the doctors, and she sat there and told us that at that point in time, she said, we can tell by his behaviour pattern and also his MRI that he's never going to walk or talk again. He's going to be locked in and just staring at the ceiling for the rest of his life. I think it was a case of, okay, so I felt blessed that we were keeping our son, but then I felt like I was going to be robbed of his personality, because he was, and I mean, I used to put stories on social media and stuff, he was such a character. He was always up to no good. Always. Some of the things he'd done in his first 4 years, he used to have people in stitches with his little stories. And I think for me to lose that personality, it was like the biggest blow. Just before taking it to school, I said to Amelia, let's just go and say goodbye to Sam, because I need to tell him I'm going to be half an hour. Again, he wasn't talking, but he was sort of moving his eyes, and he waved, and that was the first kind of communication. So he looked at Amelia and he waved, and I knew at that moment if he was going to speak, he would speak to Amelia. So the second day he waved and then he pointed, and he was pointing at Amelia, and he said, za, za, za. That's how it came out. I asked him over and over to repeat, and eventually I understood what he was trying to say was, I want one of them. It was the penguin biscuit that she was eating. Obviously I was elated. That was like the best day ever. They said he'd never walk or talk, and now he's talking. We left intensive care shortly after that, went to HDU, high dependency unit, and then eventually we went to a ward. Over the next couple of weeks, he had intense physio every single day. So he had a restricted airway of less than 40%, and he couldn't move. Basically, we would just lift him out of the padded wheelchair, lay him on the floor in the physio suite, and he would be asked to sort of roll. So initially he managed to roll. It was like having a baby all over again. It was like a newborn baby. He was 4 years old, and we were asking him to roll. And as the days and weeks went on and progressed, he went from rolling to sitting, eventually crawling, and then eventually, after months and months of intense physio, walking. But we had issues with his legs. He's had 3 operations on his legs since in the 4 years. So although he was walking, he had problems with sort of gait. Obviously his balance was just out. Tiredness, fatigue, and even now to this day, he has half a muscle in his one leg, and it'll never get any better. We had, I think it was around 6 operations on his throat, on his airway, and it was to balloon open his airway. His airway restriction just kept coming in. I think it was the scar tissue kept coming in and causing a restriction, and you'd hear it. He'd have an operation, they'd open his throat, his airway, and then within a week, I just hear the sound, the wheezing, his voice would change, because it obviously is where the scar tissue is right next to his voice box. It was having an effect on his voice. So he's very squeaky, high-pitched, sort of wheezing voice. That went on for about 4 or 5 months. 2 years on after it, I could still say that there was some evidence of brain damage and little things, like he had very bad short-term memory. He seemed to have memory problems, but he's back in the same class in school. He missed quite a bit of school, and he's had several operations over the last 4 years, 6, 7, 8, 9 operations maybe. But yet he had to learn how to not only walk and talk again, but he had to learn how to write. He could only just write before he got ill, but to learn how to pick up a pencil. And because he had tissue damage in his hands, he has nerve damage in both his arms and legs from where they went black. That nerve damage caused problems with his writing in school, but he has managed to catch up with the class he should be in. I can't believe it. They said he'd never walk and talk, and to see him now riding a bike, taking part in sports day, he's still slow, he still has muscle problems, we still have a few issues. He is now like a normal 8-year-old child who runs around with the other children in the playground.